everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Ed Giordano. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Accounts and Product here at AccuData. I've been with AccuData for 15 years. Just a brief description of who we are. We've got AccuData, I like to describe us as having 4 core competencies. The first being data. We've got every major marketing file here at AccuData installed. So we do a ton of prospect type data for direct mail, enhancements of files, and a ton of sort of best file for the action of our clients. So we do the best we can to be very, very custom for any of the solutions that our clients meet us with. Second core competency, analytics. We use this data to understand and help our clients identify future prospects or understand their own environment. We build profiles. We've got some online automated profiles to build, as well as predictive models, regression models, nested models, and multi-variable models. So all of that has been done on a pretty regular basis here. Third core competency is digital. So a ton of prospect email, loyalty email, targeted digital display, some work with Facebook, omni-channel approach associated with data that we have here at AccuData. So a variety of methods that we find solutions for our clients. And then the fourth core competency is database. We host client databases. We help them with the care and feeding of that data, as well as fulfillment of email, fulfillment of direct mail, procurement of lists inside that data, and as well as many of the tools like analytics, like I mentioned earlier, the ability to apply that to their own data set. So let's jump into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a ton about millennials. Obviously, that's why you're here, and that's what you signed up to understand, is understanding the mindset of millennials, and are they in your restaurant? Are they in your space? And you'll see later today that they definitely are, and we're going to give you some ideas on how to talk to them. You know, what their dining habits are, the characteristics. We'll even talk a little bit about Generation Z, which is the next cohort that is identified and up to bat as far as the timeline goes. We'll cover that. And then marketing technologies and how to engage millennials and that Gen Z audience. And then what's in it for you? What's the benefit? So let's talk about these cohorts. And one of the things that we've learned by constantly looking at this information is the definitions can vary depending on where you look at by source. For today's presentation, though, we're going to be referencing generational bands as per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is how labor statistics identify each of the generational cohorts. And then when we speak of millennials, we're talking about people between the ages of 17 and 36, born between 1981 and 2000. So as I mentioned earlier in the agenda, are they sharing your table? Chances are yes, they are. So we're going to take a few minutes to get to know who millennials are and see how they've contributed to the changing landscape of where we live. So let's talk about the numbers. You know, pretty interesting kind of, again, variance depending on where you look, but this is kind of a middle-of-the-road look on some of the data that exists. There are 83 million millennials at the end of 2016. That's 31% of the population, and that's growing because when you consider their age between 17 and 36, that is the cohort that has the highest level of folks entering the workspace, pretty obvious. $600 billion in estimated annual spend, and 34% of the workforce is made up of millennials, and again, that's a growing number. An interesting statistic here too, 42% are multicultural, and when we get into some of the information about millennials, it'll contribute as to what some of their interests are. And then 40% are now parents, and that is growing. You know, one of the things that I think is interesting to consider too, and I mentioned earlier that these numbers, they're pretty fluid, they'll move. That $600 billion in estimated annual spend and growing, it's estimated that by 2020, they are projected to have more than $1.4 trillion in annual spend. And that's a statistic we picked up from Accenture. And again, all of these statistics are known research companies, like multicultural statistics comes from Nielsen, and then the workforce information comes from Pew Research Center, because we're trying to build a case here from legitimate statistical sources. So what's the mindset? We talked a little bit about the makeup, but let's dive a little bit deeper in what their characteristics are. So why the buzz? Well, I mentioned earlier on the previous slide, $600 billion in spend, there should be a buzz, and the way we talk to them should be considered. Collectively, they're diverse and vibrant. They're, from their late teens to mid-30s. And by understanding this generation's sort of unique blend of aspirations and backgrounds and interests, you need to create some relative messaging that's going to strike their fancy, so to speak, and get them engaged. So what are the mindsets? Some of the key and fascinating aspects of millennial cohorts is that they view the world around them, and how they view the world around them, and how that technology has helped. So we're going to talk about a little bit of how they're technologically connected. We're also going to understand that they're socially driven, they're socially conscious, they seek adventures or unique experiences, and interestingly enough, they tend to be very, very brand loyal. So unlike generations before them, this is the first group of digital natives, so to speak. It's an interesting term, but these folks have grown up in the digital world. They heavily use wireless devices, smartphones in particular, obviously. The frequency of them checking that smartphone, well, we know it's anywhere from 43 to 150 times a day. I actually did the math. That is possible. It's a lot of work, but you can actually check your phone 150 times a day. And because they're so tech connected, they're going to adapt to new technologies pretty quickly. They rely on technology to help maintain their connections, and then they also like to see a clear link between the brand and the mobile technology being utilized. In short, if a brand is not mobily active or technologically active, they're probably not even on a millennial's radar. So social media, again, is just more than something to do for millennials. This is how they communicate. This is how they pick up reviews. This is how they socialize reviews. This is how they judge. It's their primary source for news. The platforms are a way to reach the world, and the boundaries that exist when I was younger was very, very different. Now, with millennials, there are no boundaries. They can communicate with people all over the world. They seek online content pretty often, and they turn to that online content when they make decisions. So when it comes to millennial, there are two prevailing thought processes on why they're socially conscious. First, it's the most racially and ethnically diverse group. Like I mentioned, 42% of millennials come from an ethnically diverse background. You've got a unique blend of cultures that they're growing up with. This is pretty important for brands to realize, because 75% of millennial brand loyalty study reported that it's either fairly important for them or very important that the company gives back to society. This is a very open-minded group of folks, and they like to understand that the companies that they tend to frequent support their needs and their wants to be a part of volunteering or donating or being socially conscious. The interesting thing about millennials as well is, they tend to seek adventure. They're interested in the experience over physical possessions. They're the most likely to travel abroad. They crave exotic flavors, cuisines. You think about their makeup and you think about their culture makeup, they are very, very diverse. So they're very interested in embracing those exotic flavors or those different flavors. These are folks who tend to take more prize in the experience than having possessions. They're going to be more interested in what they're going to learn or do than what that car looks like or the house that they own. Interestingly enough, this group tends to be very, very brand loyal. They view brands as an extension of themselves. They view the brand as something that they want to actively support and participate in. They're very, very, very interested in the quality and value. That's what drives their purchasing decisions. And looking to friends and family for brand feedback is an important attribute. They are going to constantly be socially searching on reviews, places to go, experiences. And the thing to remember, too, is not only are they searching for those reviews, but they're posting those reviews as well. So if a millennial has a good experience with your brand, the guerrilla marketing that can take place and the support that can take place is very much exponential, and how that is socialized can be very helpful for your brand. So, what are their dining habits? The millennials' digital tendencies supply them with constant feed of information. Their desire for offline social interaction or in-person engagement is pretty high as well. They are very, very interested in putting that phone down, but their interest needs to be captured and the experience needs to be important for them enough to definitely engage at that level. This slide's pretty interesting to me too, because when you think of millennials, I don't know, guess it's because of my age, I'm thinking of a very young set of folks, but remember, we're talking about people from their late teens to mid-30s. So there's a significant amount of money being spent. $6,000 annual budget. Of that $6,000, half of that is dedicated to dining out. And then when you sort of extrapolate those numbers out a little bit, that spend equated to 83 million estimated millennials. That's $240 billion being circulated on dining out. That is a significant number. And again, with all of the characteristics we just covered, it really should be part of your strategy to determine how you're going to speak to them, with what messages and the experiences you're going to create. So let's talk about these cohorts again. We've seen this slide already, but we've added a little statistic under there, which again is pretty striking. When you look at the ages from left to right, the greatest generation, silent generation, and so forth, you see that food budget on dining out going up and up and up. And the thing that is important for millennials to remember, or to remember about millennials, is you're talking about almost half of their food budget is dining out. And again, consider this is a growing cohort, so this is not done. That total spend from that cohort is going to continue to increase over the next 10 to 15 years, and you've got a very, very special set of folks that need a communication that is customized for their interest in what they do. So what do millennials value in brand communication? The long and short of it is millennials like to be spoken to as if it's one-to-one. They want to feel like that brand understands them. They want to feel like that brand is talking directly to them. That's a little bit of a difference to what we've seen in the past. My generation, we're okay going to the mailbox and getting the pizza coupon that everybody on the street got. Do I think they understand me? No. I'll take my $2 off my next pizza, but I'm much different than millennials. Millennials want to feel connected, and they want to feel like they're participating in that brand. They want that brand to understand who they are and what they're interested in. So what do you do about this? Well, you're easily going to know the age of those millennials, because age is a very easy piece to pick up. But also the things to consider is, how are you going to segment that list for communication? How are you going to specialize that communication? And then what are the benefits to offer? What is that call to action? How do you customize that? And the good news is, through technology, that's much easier than it was several years ago. The challenge is, I think if that's not part of the plan, you really should think about that and think very carefully of what those messages and communication is going to be. So some things to consider with millennials when you're communicating to them. Be authentic. Millennials desire that genuine experience. Communicate very authentically when you're sending any kind of message to them. And also think about what I mentioned earlier, is millennials like to pick this information up socially on networks, so make it share-worthy. Communicating to one millennial can turn into an exponential type of experience that you might get more out of it than you considered with such a very careful message. Be conscientious, create emotional connection. One of the things that is much easier through technology as well is participation. Ask for feedback, ask for likes, ask for millennials to put an event on their calendar, and then be specific on how that participation helped. Give that feedback on how many people are going to the event, how you considered their likes and their feedback, and what you did about it. It becomes not so much a communication from a marketing perspective, but now you've engaged in a dialogue, which can be very important in the creation of this audience. Again, be engaging. Just like I mentioned on the previous slide, ask millennials to be part of that conversation. Use social to create awareness. That's their source. Again, when I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that's their medium of news. That's how they're picking up information. So use that social to create awareness, and then utilize, as I mentioned before, utilize those share buttons. It's pretty easy for millennials to do. They like to participate in things like that. And again, that is the network of feedback. That's a network of communication, so push it. Some of this information too, when you're courting millennials, things to consider, and there's going to be a lot of information up here that I'm about to cover, and I want to encourage you to think about each piece kind of individually. This can be rather overwhelming, and I'm not suggesting you change the entire experience that guests go through in their dining experience, but these are just things to consider, and there are fairly easy ways to carve some of these experiences out to test. The first one is a farm-to-table cuisine. These are folks who, again, are very socially conscious. They're thinking about the environment and where food is coming from, and they support local businesses as well. So, carve out an evening or carve out a couple days a week or a portion of the menu where it can be farm-to-table cuisine. Craft and artisanal experiences, small batches. It is a very customized approach to the dining experience, but again, remember, that's the key word. Millennials are looking for an experience. They're not like me. I like to go to a restaurant. I'm okay with the menu being the same for the last 19 years. I'm shocked when it isn't and disappointed sometimes when it's not. This is a different set of folks here. They like the experience, so create a unique experience. Have healthy options. It's sort of connected to farm to table, but again, many menus now do a pretty good job of producing what the nutritional value is in meals. So, make it a part of the process. Menu customizations, pretty important sort of value. There's some really neat fast casual restaurants that are doing a great job of that, where you're sort of standing in line, building your own meal from start to finish, and it can happen pretty quickly. Make the process convenient. We've got an evolving sort of emerging kind of cohort here where time might be of the essence. Maybe there's children now in the home that didn't exist. So, make pickup pretty easily. Take and bake, grab and go, however you want to define it. Sometimes that millennials are looking for that experience but can't necessarily go into the establishment, so make it unique. Be consistent. The experience and prices are consistent from location to location. It's kind of something I mentioned when I was speaking to somebody earlier this week is be consistently unique. And I know that sounds like kind of a contradiction, but have a portion of the menu where it's going to be anybody's guess each night. Some millennials like that adventure, and then you've got the subset who appreciate that they can fall back on something that they can enjoy. And probably, I would say that the memorable part is a really, really important kind of aspect, and it's probably one of the more intimidating things to restaurants because, you're thinking significant change or something that you have to take on that's a rather big task. I really wouldn't necessarily overthink this. This is something that I would consider testing, be adventurous, invite a guest chef, perhaps, have one of the guests who's been there often maybe create a menu, have a loyalty type of participation to where our loyalty customers have created the Thursday dining experience, something like that. you test it. If it doesn't work, you don't do it. If it works, maybe you build on something like that. But that's the adventure part of the experience that millennials are craving. So let's feel a little bit older and start talking about Generation Z. So now we're going to jump from millennials who were born between the ages of the years 1981 to 2000. So let's go 2000 and beyond. Now, what's interesting about Generation Z is we're learning a little bit more each day, but these are kids. You know, these are folks who aren't adults yet. So this is an open-ended generational cohort. We don't know that there's necessarily an endpoint to this or where that's going to be, but this is the very much evolving space. And the important thing to remember, we're going to get to a piece in here that there's a significant amount of money that this cohort has to spend. So again, tons of research being done. It's very, very difficult a lot of times to pick up information on Gen Z. You know, just like millennials, they're creating their own cohort. They're still defining themselves. But again, these are children. You know, we're finding some distinct differences between millennials and Gen Z. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's cover the numbers. This part cracks me up. I'll explain why in just a second. But you know, $44 million in estimated annual spend. So that's a lot of allowance. We're talking about people who are under the age of 17 right now. So they're not adults, but they're still putting $44 million in spend. 2.5 billion cohort members globally, 2.5 billion. That is a lot of people. 40% of the U.S. population by 2020. This is the part that cracks me up because I am a parent of a Gen Zer. 82% of the parents said that their children influence their spend, and my reaction to that number is 18% of the parents are lying, or they don't know what's going on, because children influence spend all the time. Of that number, 93% know they do, and 74% of them spend an average of 5 hours a day online. That is an unbelievable number, pretty significant. Some of the characteristics we know that may not come as a surprise as parents of Gen Zers, that they tend to be less focused. You know, think about their world. They're constantly inundated and updated with real-time information. They're not as price conscious as millennials. You know, millennials grew up in an interesting time. It was during a recession. You know, they may have watched their parents lose jobs. They may have watched their parents lose homes. They may have moved as a result of it. Gen Zers didn't see that. So Gen Zers aren't thinking more as much prices as millennials or cohorts before. They tend to be early starters. You know, they're going to forego traditional college. They might go online. They might like to learn online. They tend to be, you know, much more independent, which leads us to the next piece, which is entrepreneurial. They desire a more independent, controlled work environment than the cohorts that came before them. They have higher expectations of technology. This is so true. I see it in my house every single day. My son has a touchscreen computer. He never uses the touchscreen. I like to use it a lot to annoy him. It's still fascinating to me when I touch that screen, something happens. He is not as impressed. They're big on individuality, so they seek uniqueness. They include brands that are unique. They like to be different. It's what calls them out. And they're more global. You know, there's no boundaries. Your Gen Zer in your house, if they're technologically connected, they've got friends all over the world. So how do we leverage technology to communicate to both of these cohorts? And again, you know, the challenging news is it's exhausting sometimes. You know, you have to constantly be connected, and you have to constantly be thinking and creative, and your marketing plans need to be more fluid than ever. They have to be built in a way to where the change is existent, but you're also consistently communicating. The good news is technology lends that this is a much easier process. You know, the Gen Zers and millennials, they want to be personalized, and they want interactive experiences. They want this experience to be seamless, and they want brands to answer questions, get involved, and allow them to participate. So again, these are things to think about. Other ways to form a unified view, you know, we talked a lot about behavior. We talked a lot about, you know, participating in responses. Maybe, you know, if you're emailing your audience, your millennials or Gen, well, probably more millennials. If you're emailing them, you're collecting very transactional behavior type stuff, the clicks and the opens, etc. But think about segmenting that further. Think about, you know, the third-party data. So think millennials in particular, you know, that millennial set, well, maybe they have kids and maybe they don't have kids. That could be important. The amount of money that they make could very well be important. Whether they own a home, did they move? Are they planning to move? You know, these are things to consider when you're communicating, and third-party data can help you tremendously. We're also going to talk a little bit about the analytics around that data, and also, you know, advertising socially as well. So third-party data, you know, that loyalty list is very important. You may have a collection of emails, maybe you have addresses, but again, segmenting more information in there makes it more interesting and more actionable. Using all different types of aggregate data that is compiled that makes it easy for you to segment. You know, third-party data comes from hundreds of proprietary sources, public records, self-reported. There's a ton of information out there that's much easier to get today than it ever was. And this, again, will help you understand and unlock your customers and how to communicate them, and in some ways predict their behavior. This is just an example of some of the ways that you can use third-party to segment your list. You know, demographic data, and I think most people are aware this is out there. You know, the age of the person, the age of their children, date of birth, net worth, etc. Lifestyle, what are their interests, what do they do, what does their property look like if they own a home, how many bedrooms, is there a fireplace, how much home equity is in there, specialty data, as I mentioned before, new movers, pre-movers, things like that. And then business data or firmographic data is what type of business are they in? Are they an entrepreneur? Or they have a certain title, or are they a CPA, or are they a pilot? You know, these are things to think about when you're communicating to that group, or any group really. So a lot of times, you know, we can use that third-party data to build out subsets or build out personas, however we want to define it. We're taking that information of what we know. They've reacted to an email, they've opened or they're clicked. Now we're taking that demographic information, we're saying, okay, my clickers tend to be 28 years old, they own a home, they earn more than $65,000 a year. So again, this is becoming this data is now telling you a story, and how you communicate to different subsets of millennials is going to be very important. And again, what we mentioned earlier, from what we know about millennials, remember, they want to feel like you're talking directly to them, not that you're talking to a group. And the more you know about that individual, the more targeted and clear and accurate that message can be. Add science to your data. You know, we can build profiles and understand, you know, what the makeup of a client list looks like. We can add predictive analytics to a performing campaign. We can take your sales and non-sales and understand what the variables are that are contributing to that. We can take responses versus non-responses and understanding what that contributing variables are to make those decisions. The predictive analytics allows you to understand the demographics that are being used, allows you to be more targeted, and it tends to reduce risk when you're communicating to that group, or really any group. And the piece that is becoming more and more prevalent, and you know, I would encourage everybody to embrace this because it's going to be important with both millennials and Gen Zers, is digital. Are we using digital display? How are we using that digital display? Are we targeting down to the IP or address level, or are we sort of using the hand grenade approach of spray and pray? If you are not speaking directly to the household level, you need to consider it, because your message is lost many times. We tend to take a more cookie-free approach and use the IP level information. Specific devices, once you understand what they are, we have a device ID. So we'll understand that if somebody looking on at that ad with a handheld device, or is it a PC, and what type of handheld device is that? And then varying that message by different mediums that are going to be important. Maybe it's email, maybe it's targeted display, maybe it's Facebook, things like that. It's very important to consider the amount of impressions that it takes for somebody to make decisions, millennials included. You know, it's interesting, gaining screen time is a more and more prevalent term, but it's pretty accurate. You know, how are you going to get them interested in opening the messages and participating? 78% of the American internet users are on Facebook. That's an overwhelming statistic. 32% and growing on Instagram. The average millennial checks their phone I'm still shocked by this statistic, 150 times a day. And again, yes, it is possible. But increase your exposure by using social content, display content, use your own data, prospect data, create custom audiences, and again, going back to what I've repeated several times, is make that message one-to-one. So what's the benefit? You know, what's in it for you? Well, it's wallet share. You know, millennials, we mentioned earlier, are a $6 billion group of folks and growing. You know, they're emerging into the workforce, and Gen Zers are coming. Build a loyal audience. You know, again, engage the millennials in active communication. Get the dialogue going. That becomes very exponential for your marketing purposes. They're going to share that information. They're going to share quality experiences. And increase revenue opportunities by using current guests to find more. So not only socially, but with that third-party data, you can help tickle out future customers by identifying what the important aspects of your current customers are, and we can use science to get there. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. You know, there's tons of research and tons of things going on as far as learning with the millennial mindset. We're happy to help with that information. One of the things that, you know, we're happy to offer is, if you can get us your information, feel free to drop an email. There'll be an email on the next slide requesting a white paper. We can share that. If you have questions or, you know, have sort of confusion on where to start, we can help with that as well. We consult folks all the time on the data behind their audiences and how they can become more efficient in their marketing efforts. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to hear from you soon.